The moment the little boy looked at the billionaire CEO and whispered, "Mom," every voice in the boardroom disappeared. The polished conference room on the 42nd floor of Whitmore Global had been built for billion-dollar decisions, not miracles. Crystal light spilled across the endless walnut table while executives in tailored suits exchanged puzzled glances, each one wondering why the company's quiet night janitor had just stepped through the open doors carrying a frightened little boy in one hand and a lunchbox in the other. Ethan Brooks froze the instant he realized he had wandered into the wrong room. He had only been trying to return a leather portfolio someone had forgotten in the executive hallway before beginning another long night of mopping marble floors. His faded blue maintenance uniform suddenly felt even older beneath dozens of expensive eyes. "Sir, this meeting is private," one board member snapped. Ethan lowered his head politely. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt." Before he could turn away, the little boy beside Charlotte Whitmore slipped from his chair. Barely 4 years old, dressed in a tiny navy blazer, he stared at Ethan with wide blue eyes that seemed to recognize something no one else could see. Then, without hesitation, the child ran across the room. Tiny footsteps echoed against polished stone. Every executive watched in silence. The boy wrapped both arms around Ethan's leg and looked up with innocent certainty. "Daddy." The room stopped breathing. Ethan's heart stumbled. "I think you've got the wrong person, buddy," he said gently, kneeling to meet the child's eyes. But before anyone could speak again, the little boy slowly turned toward Charlotte Whitmore. Tears filled her eyes faster than she could hide them. The most powerful businesswoman in the room, the woman financial magazines called untouchable, covered her trembling mouth as memories she had buried for nearly a year rushed back all at once. Across the table, attorneys exchanged uneasy looks. Investors whispered behind folded hands. Someone quietly closed a laptop. Nobody understood why their billionaire CEO looked as though the carefully controlled world she had spent years building had suddenly cracked open in front of everyone. Ethan stood there confused, holding the leather portfolio against his chest while his own 8-year-old daughter, Lily, waited downstairs in the security office where she always spent the first hour of his evening shift finishing homework before heading home with their elderly neighbor. He had spent years living unnoticed, quietly cleaning offices after successful people went home. He never imagined those same hallways would lead him into the center of a mystery capable of changing every life in that room forever. Charlotte finally lifted her tearful eyes to meet his. She whispered only one word: "Ethan." The sound of his name carried through the silent boardroom like the first note of a forgotten song. 24 hours earlier, neither of them believed they would ever see each other again. Ethan Brooks had never planned a life that could be described as extraordinary. 12 years earlier, he had imagined family vacations, backyard birthday parties, and growing old beside the woman he loved. Life had chosen a different road. Now every weekday began at 5 o'clock in the morning inside a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Columbus, Ohio. Before the sun painted the sky, he was already packing school lunches, braiding his daughter Lily's long blonde hair the best way he had learned from online videos, and smiling as though the bills stacked neatly on the kitchen counter did not exist. 8-year-old Lily never complained about the old apartment or the second-hand furniture. She believed the pancakes her father shaped into hearts every Saturday were better than breakfast at any restaurant. She believed the aging pickup truck that rattled whenever it started had personality. Most of all, she believed her father could fix almost anything except rainy weather. Ethan never corrected her. Some dreams deserve protection. After dropping Lily at school each morning, he worked a short shift repairing maintenance equipment for a neighborhood church before reporting to Whitmore Global every evening. By 6 o'clock, the gleaming headquarters slowly emptied as executives headed home to elegant houses and expensive dinners. That was when Ethan's workday truly began. Armed with a rolling cart, a mop, and quiet determination, he polished hallways that reflected the city lights like still water. Most employees barely noticed him. A few nodded politely. Others walked past while speaking into wireless headsets, never lifting their eyes from quarterly reports or stock prices. Ethan never took it personally. He often reminded himself that being unseen was not the same as being unworthy. Every polished floor represented honest work. Every spotless window helped provide Lily with another piano lesson, another school field trip, another chance at a childhood untouched by financial worry. During his dinner break, he usually sat alone near the employee garden overlooking the river. Instead of scrolling endlessly through his phone, he read library books about history, business leadership, and personal finance. Knowledge, he believed, belonged to anyone willing to pursue it. One evening, an executive accidentally left an expensive watch beside a restroom sink. Ethan turned it in without hesitation. Another night, he found an envelope containing several $1,000s intended for a charitable fundraiser. He delivered it directly to security before anyone even realized it was missing. Quiet integrity became such a natural habit that he never considered it remarkable. At home, Lily waited every night with questions about her homework, stories from school, and endless curiosity about the world. They ended each evening the same way. She would climb onto the old couch beside him, open a worn picture book that had once belonged to her mother, and ask him to read one more chapter even though she already knew every page by heart. Those simple moments reminded Ethan that wealth could measure comfort, but love measured home. He could not have imagined that somewhere else in the same city, a woman surrounded by unimaginable success was quietly discovering that all the money in the world could not silence a broken heart, and that before another sunrise their separate lives would begin moving toward the same unexpected destination. Charlotte Whitmore had spent years convincing the world that success could erase loneliness. By the age of 35, she had transformed Whitmore Global into one of the fastest-growing technology companies in America, appeared on magazine covers, delivered keynote speeches to standing ovations, and signed contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars with the same calm confidence that most people use to order coffee. Reporters described her as fearless. Investors called her brilliant. Competitors called her unstoppable. Yet every evening, when the elevators emptied and the last assistant wished her good night, silence became the only voice waiting inside her corner office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Columbus skyline, where thousands of lights shimmered beneath the night sky like distant stars. Charlotte often stood there holding a warm cup of tea that had long gone cold, wondering why achievement could fill every calendar but leave so much of the heart untouched. A year earlier, she had believed her future was finally taking shape. She had accepted a proposal from Daniel Mercer, a respected entrepreneur whose polished smile looked perfect beside hers in every photograph. Together, they had become the couple business magazines admired, the pair invited to every charity gala and executive retreat. From the outside, they represented ambition, elegance, and certainty. Inside the relationship, however, something had quietly disappeared. Conversations became negotiations. Affection became appearances. Promises became carefully rehearsed performances for cameras and headlines. Then, only days before their wedding, Charlotte uncovered messages that revealed Daniel had never loved her as deeply as he loved the influence attached to her name. The discovery did not arrive with shouting or dramatic confrontation. Instead, it settled over her like cold winter rain, leaving behind an emptiness that no amount of wealth could warm. She ended the engagement immediately, canceled the ceremony, and returned every expensive gift without making a public statement. News outlets invented countless rumors, but Charlotte refused to answer any of them. She buried herself in work, believing longer hours could quiet disappointment. They never did. The annual Whitmore Global Foundation Gala arrived only a few weeks later, an event she considered canceling more than once. Her advisors insisted the company needed stability, so she smiled for photographs, greeted donors, thanked community leaders, and delivered another graceful speech about hope, opportunity, and believing in people. The applause echoed through the ballroom, yet every compliment felt strangely distant. After hours of pretending everything was perfectly under control, Charlotte quietly slipped away from the crowd onto a peaceful rooftop terrace overlooking the city. A cool autumn breeze carried the scent of rain through the evening air as she finally allowed herself to breathe without performing for anyone. For the first time in years, she admitted something she had never dared say aloud. She was exhausted from being admired by people who never truly knew her. She did not need another headline. She did not need another award. Somewhere deep inside, she simply wished someone would see Charlotte before seeing the billionaire. That quiet wish, spoken only to the night sky, was already beginning to lead her toward a man who had spent years proving that genuine character often lives far beyond the spotlight. The rooftop terrace had almost emptied by the time Charlotte finally admitted she could not drive herself home. The evening air had turned cooler, carrying the distant sounds of traffic through the downtown skyline, while soft music from the charity gala drifted through the open ballroom doors behind her. She had accepted more champagne than she normally would, hoping each polite toast would quiet the ache she carried inside. Instead, the celebration only reminded her how lonely success could become when there was no one left to share it with. She rested one hand against the stone railing and closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her thoughts. That was when Ethan Brooks quietly stepped onto the terrace carrying a small cart filled with cleaning supplies. His evening shift had only just begun, and the event staff had asked him to collect empty glasses after the guests returned inside. He immediately noticed that the woman standing alone did not seem like someone seeking attention. She simply looked tired. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked gently. Charlotte looked up, surprised that someone had spoken to her without mentioning her title or company. For a brief second, she considered pretending everything was fine, but the words never came. Instead, she offered a faint smile. "I think I have had a little more to drink than I should have." Ethan nodded kindly. "Would you like some water?" She laughed softly, almost embarrassed. "That sounds like the smartest idea anyone has offered me tonight." A few minutes later, he returned with a bottle of water and a warm cup of coffee from the employee lounge. Charlotte accepted both with quiet gratitude. They sat on opposite ends of a wooden bench overlooking the city, saying almost nothing at first. The silence never felt uncomfortable. It felt honest. After several minutes, she spoke again. "Do people ever ask you how you are, or do they only ask you to do things?" Ethan smiled without bitterness. "Most people are busy. I try not to take it personally." She studied him with quiet curiosity. There was no resentment in his voice, no attempt to impress her, no hidden expectation. He simply answered with the calm confidence of a man who had made peace with life. "You seem happier than many people I know," she admitted. Ethan looked toward the lights stretching across the river. "I have a daughter who believes I can solve every problem in the world. I cannot let her discover too soon that I am still figuring most of them out." Charlotte laughed again, this time with genuine warmth. The sound surprised even her. They talked for another hour about ordinary things instead of business. Favorite childhood memories. Old diners that serve the best pie. Autumn leaves. Books borrowed from public libraries. Neither asked for the other's last name. Neither cared about social status. When the evening grew colder, Ethan called a trusted rideshare service and helped Charlotte safely back to her hotel. Before stepping inside, she thanked him sincerely for treating her like an ordinary person instead of a headline. Ethan wished her a peaceful night and walked away believing they would never meet again. Behind the hotel doors, Charlotte watched him disappear into the quiet city streets, unaware that one simple evening built on kindness, respect, and shared honesty had already begun changing the course of both their lives. 6 weeks passed, and life quietly returned to the rhythm each of them thought they understood. Ethan Brooks continued waking before sunrise, making blueberry pancakes for Lily every Saturday, working 2 jobs, and ending each evening pushing his mop through the silent hallways of Whitmore Global. He occasionally remembered the woman from the charity gala, not because she was wealthy, but because she had listened without pretending to be somewhere else. He wondered whether she had found peace after that difficult night, then gently placed the memory aside. Some people crossed your path only long enough to remind you that kindness still mattered. Charlotte Whitmore tried just as hard to bury the memory, yet it refused to disappear. During board meetings, she occasionally found herself recalling the quiet man who had offered her coffee instead of advice, compassion instead of curiosity. He had never asked for her business card, never searched her name, never hinted that he expected anything in return. That simple honesty lingered in her thoughts far longer than she cared to admit. Then one quiet Thursday morning, everything changed. Charlotte sat inside her physician's office expecting to hear that stress and exhaustion had simply caught up with her. Instead, after several careful examinations and repeated laboratory tests, the physician smiled gently before delivering news that left the room completely still. Charlotte was expecting a baby. She stared silently through the office window while spring sunlight stretched across the parking lot below. Her first emotion was not fear. It was disbelief. Her carefully organized life had always followed schedules, projections, and strategic decisions. This moment fit none of them. As reality slowly settled into her heart, another realization followed immediately behind it. She knew exactly who the father was. The evening after the gala had ended with quiet conversation, shared vulnerability, and two lonely adults making a deeply personal decision together built on mutual trust and respect. There had been no promises they could not honestly make, no deception, and no expectation that they would ever meet again. Yet now their brief encounter had become the beginning of a new life. Charlotte searched every detail she could remember. Ethan. His first name had been Ethan. He had mentioned an 8-year-old daughter named Lily. He worked nights cleaning offices. Beyond that, she knew almost nothing. No last name, no address, no telephone number. She realized with growing concern that the kindest man she had met in years had quietly disappeared back into ordinary life without leaving any way to find him. Her executive assistant suggested hiring private investigators immediately. Charlotte slowly shook her head. "I am not searching for someone because of money," she said softly. "I am searching because he deserves to know the truth." That afternoon, she canceled every remaining appointment and stood alone inside her office, watching employees stream out of nearby buildings as another workday ended. Somewhere among millions of ordinary people walked a father who had no idea another child had unexpectedly become part of his story. Charlotte gently rested her hand over her heart and whispered into the quiet office, "I will find you, Ethan. Not because I have to, because our child deserves to know the goodness I saw in you that night." Charlotte refused to turn the search into a spectacle. She instructed her executive team that no public announcement would mention her personal life, and no reward would be offered. "If he is the man I believe he is," she told her chief of staff, "money will only send the wrong people to my door." Instead, they quietly reviewed guest lists from the foundation gala, hotel security records, and transportation logs, hoping to identify the kind stranger named Ethan who had disappeared into the city before sunrise. The search produced hundreds of possibilities, but never the right one. Every Ethan they located had a different story, a different profession, a different life. Weeks slipped by, and Charlotte began wondering whether fate had placed someone extraordinary in her path only to hide him forever. Meanwhile, inside Whitmore Global headquarters, conversations spread through executive offices for reasons no one fully understood. Employees noticed unusual requests from human resources asking managers to update personnel records. Security officers received instructions to verify identification badges more carefully. Administrative assistants whispered that the chief executive officer seemed distracted during meetings, occasionally asking unexpected questions about the company's overnight maintenance crews. Rumors multiplied with remarkable speed. Some believed the company was preparing for a major acquisition. Others guessed an internal investigation was underway. Nobody imagined the truth. Ethan Brooks noticed the changes only because people suddenly greeted him more often than usual. Supervisors checked employee files, confirmed emergency contacts, and thanked night staff for their years of service with unusual sincerity. Ethan assumed the company was preparing for an annual audit. He signed the requested paperwork, smiled politely, and returned to polishing the marble lobby before the morning shift arrived. His greatest concern remained getting home in time to attend Lily's elementary school music recital. She had practiced one piano piece every evening for nearly a month, and Ethan promised he would be sitting in the front row, no matter how tired he felt after working through the night. Life remained beautifully ordinary, and he was grateful for that. One rainy Tuesday evening, as thunder rolled softly across the skyline, Ethan stopped to help an elderly receptionist carry several heavy storage boxes into an archive room. She thanked him with a warm smile and said, "You always seem to appear exactly when someone needs a hand." Ethan shrugged gently. "Maybe that is because someone once did the same thing for me." He never realized that a security camera quietly recorded the simple act of kindness. The following morning, Charlotte happened to review overnight facility footage while discussing building renovations with the operations director. She barely paid attention until she saw a familiar posture, a familiar patient smile, and a faded blue maintenance uniform. Her heartbeat quickened. She leaned closer to the screen. There he was, carrying boxes with the same quiet grace she had remembered every single day. The man the entire city had failed to find had been walking the halls of her own company all along, unseen by nearly everyone except the people who needed kindness the most. Charlotte stood outside the maintenance office for nearly 5 minutes before gathering the courage to open the door. For months, she had imagined this moment, rehearsing countless explanations during sleepless nights. Yet none of those carefully prepared words seemed large enough to carry the truth she now held in her heart. Inside the small room, Ethan Brooks was carefully organizing cleaning supplies before beginning another evening shift. Shelves lined with neatly labeled bottles surrounded him, and an old family photograph of him and Lily rested beside a worn coffee mug on the desk. It was a simple room, but everything inside reflected the quiet discipline of the man who worked there. Ethan looked up as the door opened. At first he assumed another supervisor needed assistance, but the moment he recognized Charlotte, surprise softened into a warm smile. "I am glad to see you are doing well," he said sincerely. "I have wondered about you." Charlotte smiled back, though emotion shimmered behind her eyes. "I have been looking for you for weeks." Ethan blinked in confusion. "Looking for me?" She nodded slowly. "I only knew your first name. I never imagined you worked here." He laughed gently. "Most people do not notice the janitor." His words carried no bitterness, only quiet acceptance. Charlotte stepped closer. "I noticed." Silence settled between them for a few seconds. The faint hum of fluorescent lights filled the room while rain tapped softly against the basement windows. Finally, Charlotte drew a careful breath. "There is something important I need to tell you." Ethan saw the seriousness in her expression and quietly pulled out a chair. "Please sit." She remained standing, her hands folded together. "A few weeks after we last saw each other, I visited my doctor." Ethan's expression became attentive. "Are you all right?" She smiled softly. "Yes, I am healthy." Another pause followed. "And I am expecting a baby." The words rested quietly in the room. Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment, allowing the meaning to settle naturally instead of reacting with fear or disbelief. When he looked back at Charlotte, his first question was not about wealth, responsibility, or public attention. It was simple. "How are you feeling?" Charlotte felt tears gathering again. She had expected confusion. She had prepared herself for anger. Instead, she found compassion. "Some days I am frightened," she admitted. "Some days I feel hopeful." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. Those two feelings often arrive together when children enter our lives. Charlotte searched his face for signs of hesitation. "I do not want anything from you that you cannot freely give," she said quietly. "I only believed you deserved to know." Ethan walked to the small photograph of Lily and gently picked it up. He looked at his smiling daughter before turning back toward Charlotte. "Children are never mistakes," he said with calm conviction. "They are responsibilities, blessings, and opportunities to become better than we were yesterday." Charlotte's shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks. She reached into her handbag and carefully placed an envelope on the desk. Ethan looked at it, but made no effort to touch it. "It is not money," Charlotte explained with a faint smile. "It is the first ultrasound picture." Ethan slowly opened the envelope. As he looked at the tiny image, the quiet janitor who had spent years believing life had already written his story realized an entirely new chapter had just begun. News traveled faster than either of them expected. Charlotte had shared the truth with only a handful of trusted people, yet powerful companies had a way of turning private conversations into public speculation. Members of the Whitmore family questioned her judgment with carefully chosen words that carried the weight of disappointment. Senior board members worried about shareholder confidence and media attention. Financial analysts quietly debated whether the company's reputation might suffer if the story became public. To many of them, Ethan Brooks was not a devoted father or an honorable man. He was simply a janitor whose life did not fit the image they believed a billionaire should stand beside. Charlotte listened to every opinion without interrupting. When the final voice fell silent, she calmly folded her hands on the conference table. "You are evaluating his paycheck," she said softly. "I am evaluating his character. Those are not the same thing." The room offered no immediate reply. A few days later, Charlotte invited Ethan to meet her in a quiet botanical garden instead of another corporate office. Spring flowers had begun to bloom beside winding stone paths, and children laughed near a small fountain while birds drifted through the warm afternoon air. It felt like a place where truth could breathe more easily than inside boardrooms. Ethan arrived wearing his cleanest button-down shirt, still looking slightly uncomfortable among people who recognized Charlotte from magazine covers. He apologized for being a few minutes late because Lily's piano lesson had ended later than expected. Charlotte smiled. You never have to apologize for putting your daughter first. They walked slowly beneath flowering trees, speaking about ordinary things before difficult ones. Finally, Charlotte stopped near a wooden bridge overlooking a quiet pond. There will be people who tell you this life is too complicated, she admitted. Some will say you should accept a generous settlement and quietly walk away. Ethan looked across the still water before answering. Is that what you want? She immediately shook her head. No. Ethan nodded once. Then my answer is easy. Charlotte searched his face. You have not even heard the offer. He smiled gently. Because I am not here to negotiate a child. The breeze carried a few flower petals across the water as silence settled between them. Ethan continued speaking with the same quiet certainty that had first earned her trust. I have never wanted your company, your fortune, or your last name. Those things belong to you because you earned them. What matters to me is much simpler. If this little one is my child, then I will love this child with everything I have, just as I love Lily. If you choose to let me be part of that journey, I will be grateful. If you need time, I will respect that too. But I will never disappear simply because life became complicated. Charlotte felt tears warming her eyes again, not from sadness, but from relief. For months, she had been surrounded by experts discussing risk, reputation, and public perception. Standing beside Ethan, she was finally hearing someone speak only about responsibility, kindness, and family. In that quiet garden, far away from cameras and corporate expectations, Charlotte realized that true wealth had never been measured by what a person owned. It was measured by what they were willing to protect when everything else became uncertain. 1 year later, the same boardroom that had once measured people by titles and salaries welcomed a very different kind of celebration. Morning sunlight poured through the towering glass windows as employees, community leaders, and families gathered for the opening of the Whitmore Family Foundation, a new organization dedicated to supporting single parents, children, and working families who simply needed someone to believe in them. There were no grand displays of luxury, no elaborate speeches about profits or market share. Instead, photographs of local families lined the entrance, reminding every guest that the strongest communities were built one act of kindness at a time. Charlotte Whitmore stood near the stage holding a smiling baby boy named Noah while 8-year-old Lily, now proudly 9, carefully adjusted the ribbon on her little brother's stroller. She had accepted him with a love that surprised even the adults around her. To Lily, he was never a complicated story. He was simply family. Ethan Brooks waited quietly beside them, wearing the same gentle smile he had carried long before anyone knew his name. His blue maintenance uniform had been replaced with a simple navy suit, yet nothing about his posture had changed. He still greeted every security guard, receptionist, and custodian by name. He still believed respect belonged to everyone equally. As guests filled the room, several executives who had once questioned Charlotte's decision approached Ethan one by one. None of them offered excuses. They simply shook his hand with genuine respect. Time had revealed what resumes never could. Character had become impossible to overlook. When Charlotte stepped to the podium, the room grew still. She looked across the audience before speaking. People often ask me what changed my life, she began softly. Some expect me to mention a business deal or a financial milestone. The truth is much simpler. My life changed the day someone treated me with kindness when they had nothing to gain. She turned toward Ethan, who lowered his eyes with quiet humility. He never asked who I was. He never asked what I owned. He only asked whether I was all right. The audience remained completely silent. Charlotte smiled through grateful tears. That simple question reminded me that dignity cannot be purchased. It can only be given. She invited Ethan onto the stage. He hesitated for a moment before joining her, still uncomfortable with attention. Taking the microphone, he looked at the crowd and spoke with the same calm sincerity that had guided every chapter of his life. I have cleaned floors for many years, he said. People sometimes think the value of work depends on the job title. I have learned something different. Any honest work done with love has dignity. Any family built on respect is already rich. The applause that followed was not loud because people felt obligated to clap. It rose slowly, warmly, and sincerely from hearts that had finally understood the difference between success and significance. As Ethan looked toward Charlotte, Lily, and little Noah, he realized the greatest miracle had never been meeting a billionaire. It had been discovering that kindness offered without expectation could quietly transform strangers into a family. And in the end, the world did not remember the fortune that brought them together. It remembered the quiet grace that taught everyone watching that the richest life is the one built on love, humility, second chances, and unwavering dignity.